Alright class, today we're going to talk about Cluster 3, Lesson 10, Comparing Linear Functions. Now, in order for us to compare linear functions, we're going to go through a couple steps. And step 1 is that we have to determine the slope of the actual linear function. Now, the way we found slope before was either we used the mini table or we did y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1, whatever one you prefer. Then step 2 is that we're going to determine the location of our y-intercept. Okay, we know that the y-intercept is the b. Depending on what the question is asking, we may have to find that. Now, after we complete step 1 and 2, step 3 is that we're going to use that information from step 1 and step 2 to help us select the best possible answer choice. Okay, now one thing that I do want to pinpoint is that when we have to compare linear functions, we can either get an equation. Okay, so our equations, follow the format of y equals mx plus b. Okay, we can get a table. So in the table, we have basically it's a box with x and y values. Okay, we can even get a graph. So on a coordinate plane we can do rise over run, and we can find a y-intercept based off where it crosses your y-axis. Okay, and the last one is basically like a scenario. It's just a statement telling you what's there, kind of like a word problem. Okay, so out of those 4 options, that's what possibly could come up when we're solving or comparing linear functions. So now that we know what we have to do and what we could possibly see, let's look at some examples. Okay, in example 1, it says the 2 functions are shown below. Function 1 is y equals negative 4 over 7x minus 4, and function 2 is the table. The question says which function is least steep and what is the slope. So the 2 things we're looking for is which one is less steep and which one provides me with a slope that's in my answer choices. Now, based off the 3 steps that were provided, step 1 says find the slope, step 2 says identify your y-intercept, and then step 3 says use those 2 things to answer your question. So because it already stated that I have to compare slope, I don't have to find my y-intercept. So I'm going to go to function 1, identify what my slope is, and slope is always going to be an equation right beside the x. So my slope for this one is negative 4 over 7. Okay, then when I go and look at function 2, it's a table, so I got to do my rate of change. From 0 to 2 was an increase of 2. From 2 to 3 was an increase of 1. For my y values, I went from 2 to 0.8. That was a decrease of 1.2. And then I went from 0.8 to 0.2. That was also a decrease of 0.4. Now, for me to get my slope, I can use any one of those sets of values, but I'm going to pick the one that has the smaller x value. Anytime you have one with the x value of 1, that should be the easiest one, so pick that one. So my slope, when I set this one up, is going to be negative 0.4 over 1. Now, the way that is written, it's a little weird because we got a decimal and a fraction. So we need to change that to something we're familiar with. And when you type it in the calculator, it's going to give you 2/5. Okay? So a negative 2/5. So with that being said, let's compare. Now we got negative 4 over 7, negative 2/5. Looking at the slope, we can get rid of negative 4. So answer choice B don't match our slope, and answer choice D don't match our slope. So that means we're left with answer choice C, and that's negative 3/5. That don't match either. So the only choice that was left out of all 4 is answer choice A, because it matches the slopes that we have, and actually negative 4 over 7 is less steep than negative 2/5. So the answer for this one is going to be A. Okay, so looking at example 2, it says Raphael compared the functions of w, which is y equals 2x plus 8, to the function z, a linear function shown in the table. Now, it says which statement is true. Now, just by reading the question, it did not tell me what exactly I need to find up front. So because it did not tell me what I needed to find up front, I'm going to have to find the slope and the y-intercept and then compare my answer choices. Okay, so the equation already gave me my slope and my y-intercept, so I'm just going to identify those. So my slope for this equation is 2. My y-intercept is a positive 8. So now let's find it for the table. So in order to do the table, we do our rate of change for both sides. And then once we find our rate of change, we'll be able to identify the slope. And once we identify slope, because it's all the same on both sides, so that's going to be negative 6 over 2, which simplifies to be negative 3. Now I can use that information, plug it in to help me find b. So I'm plugging it in my y equals mx plus b. Using my first point for my y, which is 1, it's going to be equal to my slope, which is negative 3, times my first x value, which is 2, plus b. Okay, it's going to give me negative 6 plus b is equal to 1. I'm going to move that over there. That's going to give me a positive 6. Combined together, that's going to be 7. So my b for the table is 7. And then my m for the table was a negative 3. Okay, so let's compare our answer choices. First answer choice says the y-intercept of the function w is 1 unit larger than the y-intercept of the function z. Okay, so if we look at that, the y-intercept for w was 8. The y-intercept for z was 7. Now, based off that and what they just said, that statement could be true. Okay, so but let's compare the rest of them. It says the y-intercept of the function z is 1 unit larger than the y-intercept for function w. That is not true. All they did was flip it around. W is larger than z, so b is not it. Answer choice C says the y-intercept of the function w is 5 units larger than the y-intercept of function z. That's not true. We already know it's only 1. Okay, and the answer choice D says 5 units as well, so that's not true either. Answer choice A is the only one that matched the scenario based off my y-intercepts. So the answer for example 2 is A.